Director of CIA George Tenet is with me in Washington at the Bloomberg Studios. On the morning of September 11, 2001, he was director of the Central Intelligence Agency. In July 2004, he resigned from that job after serving for 7 years under 2 presidents. For the last 3 years, he has been silent about his role in the run-up to the Iraqi invasion. Now he has written about that and more in his new memoir. It is called Center of the Storm: My Years at the CIA. The book has been the talk of Washington and New York and the country. I am pleased to have him here to talk about those questions, his book, and much more. Let me first of all say thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Charlie.
Secondly, a recognition of the fact that you spent a central part of your life as first deputy, then director of the CIA. And the men and women of the CIA mean a lot to you.
They really do.
And the fact that you have served together is at the core of how you feel about public service and your recognition of the commitment and the sacrifice they make. So I wanted you to know I understand that going in, and a recognition that you believe so strongly about that, and it's been seen in this book and it's been seen in other interviews that you have done. Here is what one reviewer said. This was Tim Rutten in the Los Angeles Times. "It's not what the author intended, but conclusions one takes away from At the Center of the Storm," the book. It is that Tenet's greatest shortcoming as a public servant was that he failed to act on the insight and what it might have meant and what difference it might have made. He's clearly talking about, as others have, you and your reservations about going to war with Iraq and whether you should have spoken up.
Well, Charlie, you know, when you're the director of Central Intelligence, your job is to provide objective analysis to the president and senior policymakers. I believed it was important to do that. I believe that when you cross the line and try and make policy pronouncements, the unintended casualty is perhaps people don't then read your analysis and then don't view you as being objective. You know, at the end of the day, it's a policy call. I always knew where the bright line was. I'm not trying to portray myself as a hero. I never went to the President of the United States and said, don't do this. I also thought it was important to do my job objectively and give him the best insights that he possibly could into his own decision making. People can quibble with that. I saw my job one way. I did it one way. History can make a judge as to whether I should have done it differently, but our job has been stay on the other side of that line, do the best you can to inform, and then let policymakers decide.
Let me understand exactly what you believe. That if in fact you had grave misgivings about going to war with Iraq, it was not your duty, because it would be talking about policy, and you should not have told the President of the United States.
Well, sir, Charlie, I don't believe you should cross that line. But having said that, I am someone that has a conscience. If I felt strongly enough about it, I could have gone to the President. I didn't do that. So I can't recreate history. I can't look at people today and say, well, I'm some kind of a misunderstood hero who said, no, I didn't. That's the way it happened. You can't recreate it.
Your very good friend, David Boren, president of the University of Oklahoma, your mentor, has said that you had great misgivings about Iraq, and you talked to him about it in phone conversations. He also says that you and Colin Powell should have resigned, and that way you would have had the impact that was important to have.
Well, Charlie, resigning when you're in the middle of running down Al-Qaeda, having troops in harm's way, having our men and women in harm's way, that may be an easy thing to do. That's not the way I thought I should do my job. I thought I needed to lead men and women. I needed to continue to be objective and honest. I need to give the President my best judgment. I never thought about doing any such thing. So there it is.
But what did you think when you heard him, when you expressed your misgivings and he gave you that judgment of
this is a personal decision that anybody would make. I viewed that it was I would serve my country better by staying in my job. You know, you look at Iraq in 2 or 3 segments. We have the WMD piece. We were wrong, not because we were disingenuous, but because it was what we believed. People have said we knowingly knew this data was wrong and told the President of the United States. That's not true. We got into the post-war phase, where we consciously and every day, once we saw what was happening on the ground, told policymakers, told truth to power, I brought officers in, I brought people from Baghdad in to say, look, This isn't working. We have a growing insurgency. Debathification, disbanding of the Army, the way we're going about this is not going to work. Intelligence was very, very clear about that. I think we did our job.
Okay, I want to get to after the invasion, but let me just stay with the invasion for a second.
Yeah.
Did anybody come to you who you respected within the agency or outside and say, Mr. Director, all this talk about weapons of mass destruction is wrong. They don't have them.
No.
No one in the government said to
No.
you.
No, and you've had people on your show, and others have said, people who said, we had, for example, someone has said, we had a high-level source who said there was no WMD. In fact, what that high-level source said was he doesn't have nuclear weapons, but he's covertly and aggressively producing them. He's stockpiling chemical weapons. The weapon of last resort is chemical weapons on missile launchers that he will use against the Israelis, and he's only dabbling in biological weapons. We had another high-level source says he's producing chemical and biological weapons. He knows how to actively deceive the UN inspectors and will continue to do so. Even after we produced our estimate, in the first instance, that person wasn't particularly, I wouldn't call him a source, but people have represented that. People came to us and said things. It never happened that way. Even after we produced the estimate, particularly with regard to the second source I'm talking to you about, anything that we learned corroborated what we believed, and we believed it for a period of years. Now, you would say to me, if you go back and do the retrospective, obviously, you always have to challenge your underlying assumptions. We believed we understood that story. History, his own record of deception and denial, his previous use, all of these things factored into how honest men and women did their work. I also say in the book, Charlie, I should have kicked off that estimate a lot earlier than I did. I take that.
This is the National Intelligence Estimate.
Yeah, and so at the end of the day, I often ask the question, do I think they would have come to different conclusions?
They being?
Our analysts.
Right.
I think we may have come to more nuanced conclusions, but I don't know that analysts would have ever said, he doesn't have weapons programs, he can't quickly surge to produce them. We may have said something milder, but I don't know that those men and women would have come to fundamentally different conclusions, though obviously the way we wrote it, particularly our key judgments, should have been more nuanced.
That's one of the lessons you've learned from this.
Charlie, it's the one thing I say to students is, every day that you wake up, you have to rip apart your linchpin and what your foundation is and do it over again. We have to do it. Policymakers have to do it. You should never take for granted what you believe you know. We believed it.
Would you have going to the president and saying, I have great misgivings about that, change the president's decision as far as you are concerned and as much as you know? Well,
I doubt it, Charlie. I don't know that. I wouldn't presume to know what the president would say. I think, again, he had lots of policymakers who had a totally different point of view. I wouldn't presume to know what the president would think.
Was there anything that might have prevented us from going to war with Iraq in terms of the decision-making process as you saw it?
I doubt it, Charlie. I guess if we had said he doesn't have weapons of mass destruction, we can't go to the international community on that basis. Maybe that would have made a difference. But now you're asking me. I can't. I really, in hindsight,
okay, but
don't
it just
know.
puts a premium on what we said and knew about weapons of mass destruction. If that was a decisive factor,
at least one issue, yes.
Because lots of people believe that the administration would have gone to war even if they didn't believe there were weapons of mass destruction. And I think principal figures in the administration have said something like that.
Well, Charlie, certainly lots of people had Iraq in their eyes before they came to the administration and when they got to the administration. But ultimately, I can't tell you. Some of my guys would say, well, they would have gone anyway. Charlie.
Some of your guys, meaning guys that work with you.
Yeah, they would have gone anyway. And of course, people think, people go to war for lots of reasons, Charlie. The NIE was a piece of it.
National Intelligence Estimate.
Yes, the National Intelligence Estimate was a piece of it. There are people who believed we needed to change the face of the Middle East, and Iraq was a way to do that. That may have been another reason of it. People were concerned about terrorism. People thought this was unfinished business. This may have been about ideology. There are lots of things in this. The NIE certainly is a piece of this. I just don't think it's the sole reason we ever went. We were wrong. You don't want to look like you're whining after the fact, but there are many reasons that policymakers believe this was something that was essential to do.
As you have thought about this since you left government, was it a mistake to go to Iraq?
Well, Charlie, you know, history's going to make a judgment. I didn't tell the president not to do it. We ultimately know, if we look at the consequences today, we have to be honest about the fact that we're in a very difficult place. Our strategic interests in that region have been jeopardized. It's something we have to worry about. So,
but is it hard for you to say this was a mistake? We should acknowledge
Charlie,
this was a mistake.
Charlie, it's hard to say if you don't say it at the front end, if you're not vocal about it and you don't put it on the table. I've never been one of those people who walk back and try and look like you were a hero when you weren't.
Okay, but that's not what anybody's asking you to do. Somebody's asking for your judgment, and you're asking you to serve history by saying, look, we made these decisions. I'm not apologizing. I'm not trying to make excuses. This is what I did, and this is what I said, but I now know it was wrong to go to war in Iraq.
I can only tell you what I just told you. If we look at where we are, we're in a very difficult place. And I'm not going to be someone who changes my stripes from the beginning, middle to end of this.
Tell me where you think this thing is going and what options we have left. That's you as a guy who's been involved in this kind of consideration for a while.
Well, I have a concern that I know General Petraeus is doing a good job. If we had adopted that strategy 3.5 years ago, I'd be more optimistic.
Wonder why we didn't.
Well, Charlie, that's an interesting question, isn't it? You know, it's interesting. Before the war, when we were in the ultimatum phase, we said only the top would have to go. President was told we were going to pursue a policy of national reconciliation the way we did it in South Africa. You know, we went to Afghanistan. It's interesting. You know, we allowed a country to legitimize its leadership from tribal councils, and Karzai was selected. We had a Bonn conference. We brought all the stakeholders in the region together to figure out what we were going to do. We went to Iraq. None of us knew how this was ultimately going to be implemented, right?
You never did with war.
Well, no, but at the front end, and here's a principal point, you need to know.
You need to have a plan.
You need to know before you go to war that your war objectives, conflict termination, peacekeeping, stabilization are all integrated, and you need to know where you're going before you get there. So when you get on the ground, the attitude is, we're going to get rid of that army. We're going to basically debathify. We're going to take a country and tell 20 or 25% of the population, you don't have any relevance anymore. We didn't put money in people's hands. We didn't put them to work fat. They didn't understand why we couldn't secure the country quickly. So as a consequence, so you learn about this. And so what we learned about it and reported on it was to say, look, you cannot walk in and command a country what to do. In the beginning phases, Zal Khalilzad, who is now our ambassador to the United Nations, and our guys started a process where Iraqis were meeting, trying to legitimize themselves, trying to have a leadership emerge. Let them believe that they have control over this, because we understand, as we wrote in papers in January and February and March, this country is not going to look at an occupation in particularly good terms.
No country does.
No, well, not in the heart of the Middle East. So if the model was post-war Germany, you know, the way we thought of it, the way some people thought about
this, what Secretary Rice said.
Well, post-war Germany, well, you can't have post-war Germany in the heart of the Middle East. The whole world went to war against post-war Germany. In the heart of the Middle East, in this cultural environment, that's not a model.
You are raising questions now that have to do with the fact that there was no planning for after the toppling of Saddam, and what planning there might have been was not wide or deep enough, and all those questions. I hear you in this book saying the following: we were giving advice to the administration in the CIA about a lot of these kinds of problems, and they didn't seem to be listening. Correct or not?
I believe that's true, Charlie.
Then who is not listening?
Well, Charlie,
who was listening? Who was George Tenet saying, we got problems here?
Charlie, our reporting was circulated far and wide.
The president?
We brought it to everybody. We put it on the table. We brought our senior officers in. We expressed our point. Remember, here's the teaching point. Intelligence is one input in the decision-making
There's
process.
the military, there's
everybody else has other inputs.
Right.
Okay? So we're one piece of the puzzle. Here's our view of what's going on. It was clear, it was direct, and I believe it ended up being very accurate at the end of the day.
But was it debated? Was there real discussion? Was it taken seriously so that people said we may be compounding our mistake here?
Look, at the end of the day, I believe everybody understood where we were. I believe everybody understood what the data, what our people were reporting. The key here is, key here is, and this is a lesson as you're living through something, when you get a lot of contrary data, you must be agile enough to recognize that however you started, you have to change quickly and adopt a different posture. It's not easy to do.
And it
it's
didn't
not
happen.
easy to do.
And it didn't happen.
No, it didn't happen. That's correct.
I mean, that's certainly one of the lessons.
And
there was no
you
debate, you say in this book, there was no debate, serious debate about going to war. And now there's no serious debate about the mistakes we're making once we're there.
Well, Charlie,
this is the most powerful country in the world.
Charlie, you know, one of the reasons I wrote the book was just try and reflect on, you know, when you think about taking a country to war, what are the things you have to think about? And nobody's perfect here. And as I say, we weren't good on the front end. We were very good on the back end. What I'm trying to say is, when you get into that post-war phase, this is about politics, economics, and powering, all three working together. We had large numbers of unemployed people in the governance of Iraq, racked with unemployment. We basically, you know, for every Iraqi who was in the army who didn't come home, he had 6 brothers and sisters and extended families who weren't being paid anymore. They had guns, they had ammunition. So at the end of the day, can I tell you that our approach or how I thought about it would have worked? I don't know. Do I think we might have been better off? Yes. It's easy for us to sit here and second guess it. All I know is there are lots of lessons that we need to learn.
I just want to encourage the idea that this is not about second guessing. This is about saying what happened and what do we learn from it. That seems to be, ought to be the purpose of your book and your experience, as well as this conversation, every other.
And the issue today, you know, Charlie, you said, well, what about, maybe you don't want to talk about this now, what about the future and how do you look at it, right?
I do want to talk about the future now.
Well, it's not just about Iraq. You've got to be careful here. There's a whole region at risk. All of these people have a stake in what happens in Iraq. Nobody wants to, I don't believe anybody wants to see an all-out civil war in that. There's sectarian conflict. There's a mini civil war going on today.
You mean the Iranians don't want that, the Saudis don't want that, the Jordanians don't want that, the Egyptians don't want that.
The Turks don't want that. Exactly. Nobody wants that.
So, Al-Qaeda wants that.
Well, they want that, of course. But the key, of course, is ultimately Iraqis have to make a decision about whether they're going to pursue a reconciliation of their own country. Iraqis have to make a decision about what they want and how they want to live together. We're not going to make that decision now. The regional stakeholders, there are Sunnis and Shia who have a regional stake in this. They need to be brought to a table. They need to be talked to. You may not want to have them all in the room, but at some point, the Saudis and the Iranians and the Syrians, everybody has to sit at the table, and everybody needs to understand what the consequences are. And you need to look at the Sunni countries and say, listen, this is not about you empowering your constituents to continue fighting. You look at the Iranians and say, listen, you know, your economy is not doing particularly well. You've got your own problems on your hands. It is not in your interest to see all of this happen. You need to all sit down with us, whether we're at the table or not at the table. We need to work a way forward here that stabilizes this situation, that takes away bad behavior, that stops people from stoking these fires. Let these people make these decisions. We need to think about, Let me
interrupt you, though, before going. We need to think about it. Why do you think that hasn't happened?
Well,
we now have put all our marbles on the Maliki government. Right. That's where it is. The ball game there is whether they're going to be able to reach some kind of agreement.
I think that the Secretary of State is out there thinking along these lines.
It is now 2007.
I understand that, but you know, now we have to move forward. Now you have to think, you know, we have to have some period of healing here.
Healing
among the American people, among us. We need to think about as one country. Look, this vitriolic finger pointing that's going on here
between Democrats and
Republicans. Everybody has their heart.
Although they had a meeting yesterday in which they talked about some.
That's great.
And they think.
And I think that's very, very important. But everybody should stop challenging everyone else's motives here, because at the end of the day, we want those kids to come home as fast as possible. All of us do,
including the president.
Absolutely. Everybody wants our kids to come home. And at the end of the day, we're going to have to, just as Americans are surging, Iraqis have to surge to meet their responsibilities. They're not stupid. They must be looking at this American debate and understand it.
David Boren, your good friend and mentor and former chairman, I think, of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and you were chief of staff, if I remember all of my history about this, says the following thing. He went to see George Bush 41, and he said to George Bush 41, you know, I think we ought to go to Baghdad and topple Saddam. This is in 91. President Bush said to him, 41, and what do you think when we get in the middle of a civil war, our end strategy is? And Boren then realized, he said, Bush 41 was right.
Right.
We didn't learn that lesson, did we?
Well, Charlie, I think the lesson that we needed to learn
about the Civil War.
I think the lesson is once you get in the business of war, you also need to have a plan to keep the peace, and you also need to think through this in the cultural environment that you're about to walk into.
That's interesting. What we knew about the cultural environment we were about to walk into, and who should have known that?
Well, Charlie, I think if you look at things we wrote about the implications of occupation, the implications of an Iraqi tribal society, I think that there was some pretty prescient writing and reporting. This was never going to be easy. And you know, the important thing, the message is, the message from us, I believe, was, we'll be treated as liberators for a very limited period of time.
If you walk into the office of former Secretary of State, former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, and have a conversation like this with him, he walks you over to his stand-up desk, and he opens it and he says, I want you to read this. Would you sit at this table and read this? And he's got a list of about 100 things that he thinks could go wrong.
Yes, he did.
And that the United States
Right.
had to be prepared.
Yes, he did. He had a list like that.
So
he
what
talked
happened
about
there?
that. Well, I don't know. I mean, Don and I haven't talked in a long time. All I can say is, and I give him credit because he did put lists like that on the table all the time.
And you saw them.
Yeah, and he put them on the table.
And the president saw them.
Yeah, we put them on the table, but here's, look, at the end of the day, we have to go back and look at implementation and ask the government, look, history really matters here. You know, it may not be the last time the United States of America in my lifetime and your lifetime uses force. May not be. We hope we never do. So I think one of the things I'm trying to do, and I think one of the things we need to reflect on as we move forward, because we have to move forward.
Did you learn anything about what ought to be the relationship between a CIA director who briefs the president every morning and the president, whether there's any danger, as some have suggested, feeling too comfortable, too close, too anything, as some have suggested, that this guy had kept you there because his father had suggested it, and that maybe you were too indebted to him, too close to him, too something?
It's not the way I did my job. Intelligence was central to the way this president worked. It was a business relationship. You know, Charlie, there are many mornings we walked in and delivered lots of bad news that nobody wanted to hear, and we did our job faithfully. We were central to it. Now people say, well, well, you know, after 9/11, you know, human beings looked at the world, and there was everybody was in the same storm working very, very hard. It's very hard to dismiss the human connections that are made there, but the business never got lost sight of. I believe I did my job straight up and down and treated the president. He was the most important client in the country, and people can presume that, oh, because you're in there every day. We were central. It's not a matter of being close. You don't do your job. If you're close, you're central, you do your best, you give them your unvarnished views about how you think, what the intelligence says, and I believe we did that every day.
You have no reservations about you served this president in terms of the advice you gave him in those briefings?
I believe, Charlie, that we gave him the best judgments that men and women produced every day on paper, whether people agreed with them or not, about not just terrorism or Iraq, but about the world, the entire world. Russia, China, what's going on in the Middle East, what's happening in Africa. Vast array of things that we were working on. Lots of things that were quite successful that people often forget
Tell
about.
me what you think about his decision-making process. You have said that you thought that he handled himself extraordinarily well in the aftermath of 9/11.
There's no doubt about that.
Okay, beyond 9/11. Do
Right.
you have the same sense that he was doing a very good job, was listening to all the advice he could find, was instigating, stimulating people to come to him and tell him what they knew?
Charlie, I believe he did. Now, how he made his personal decision and how he thought about it, I can't presume to know what was in the president's head.
And the vice president?
I can't presume to know what was in his head. You know, the other thing is that, you know, the vice president, you know, I say in the book, of course, this gets lost in all of this now. he was very helpful to us in many ways.
Helpful to us in what way?
Well, he looked after our resources. He was a proponent of intelligence. When I went to him for help on terrorism and other things, call this foreign leader, we need to get traction here. He always did it. You know, we probably ended up crossing swords on the terrorism issue. You know, people often, you all want these personal reflections.
No, we don't. We want to understand clearly. I mean, power is exercised by human beings.
Well, he's a serious,
power is exercised by human
he's
beings, and they make decisions, and we just want to understand the process.
He was a serious man. He had his own points of view about the world. He was a senior policymaker.
And what did the two of you disagree about? Maybe that would be helpful.
Well, I mean, it's not, look, Charlie, it's not about disagreement. It's about an interpretation.
Well, then what did you interpret differently?
We interpreted the Iraq-Al-Qaeda relationship differently. I think that the vice president believed there was much more, that he believed there was more of an operational linkage between Iraq and Al-Qaeda, and we just never did. We'd give you there were contacts and training and the safe haven issues. We never believed there was operational direction and control.
They make a big deal about Saddam, they being a whole bunch of people who believe there was more than just contact, make a big deal about the fact that Saddam was sending money to suicide bombers.
To the Palestinian rejectionists. Look, we document all that. We know all that. The hot button issue, of course, is Iraq and Al-Qaeda. And we, in our paper, we wrote a paper in January of 2003, the Iraq-Al-Qaeda relationship, and we very patiently outlined our areas of concern and very patiently said, in our view, there was no authority, direction, and control, and we had an instance of two organizations trying to seek to take advantage of each other, but we noted our concerns.
Do you think the vice president still believes that there was some level of operational contact between Saddam and Al-Qaeda?
I don't know what he still believes. I've been gone for 3 years. I haven't, you know, I just don't know what he believes. I just know that this was you know, Charlie, people say, oh, you cook the books. Well, if we cooked the books, why didn't we just let the president and Colin Powell go to the UN and say, there's operational direction and control between Iraq and Al-Qaeda?
Well, because Colin Powell was not prepared to do that.
Well, why didn't we let the president? Well, we could have served it up. We said, no, Colin, this is put it in the speech. We didn't do that. If we were going to,
now you didn't believe in the Niger stuff too.
Well, no, but exactly right. So if you're cooking the books, Colin, put the Niger stuff in. We didn't do that. We didn't believe it.
When you look at all of this process here and writing this book, did you change your mind about anything? Did distance give you perspective in which you said, I've changed the way I thought about this. I've changed the way I see this?
Well, over the course of time, I think when I initially left, I thought about writing fairly quickly. I had no perspective at all. It was just too raw. I had just been in the middle of it, and I stepped away consciously.
Tell me what the pain was. It was too raw. What was the pain when you left? That somehow they were blaming you, that somehow you were the scapegoat, that somehow...
No, Charlie, it was that, you know, we just lived through some pretty tough moments in American history. Tough moments. We were in the middle of all of it, and it took a toll. So I consciously made a decision to say, you know, this is, you don't want to write if you're emotional. Okay. You certainly don't want to be angry. You know, there's no sense in going over slam dunk. I don't want to go over that anymore. That had a real impact on me early on.
The idea that it was reported that you had said slam dunk, and the interpretation was that you were saying the intelligence was a slam dunk with respect to WMD. Well, that was the interpretation that offended you.
Well, yeah, and the point that it gets thrown out the door sometime in 2004 when things aren't
by
going
the
so
vice
well.
president of the United States.
I don't know who did it, Charlie.
Well, you saw him on Meet the Press, and you make a point
well,
of that.
He did it later. I don't know who initially fed it, but you know, yes, when you.
Well, I mean, I can tell you who the candidates are because I can tell you who was in the
Charlie,
room.
it's irrelevant. Let's not make this a big point. So when you say, so this was a tough period. You know, you'd work your heart out for the country 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, doing the best you can. You live through these tumultuous events. You know, Charlie, 10 years from now, I may think about this differently. Other people are going to...
And you may know more differently.
Well, others may write. Historians may have access to different... People will give their perspectives. I may be wrong or right about some things. I'm just trying to give you my view.
What has it done in your judgment, with the advantage of hindsight, to this country that you have served and loved in terms of its capacity to influence events around the world?
Well, we know we're less admired if you look at polling data all over the world. People have a different perception of us. So the important thing now is, you know, there are millions of people around the world who remember the fact that we rebuilt Europe after World War II.
And there are millions of people lining up to get a visa.
And the country does great. But here's the point.
Yeah.
The point is, what we learned is that we need to be reaching out, talking to people about issues they care about, not just issues we care about. Be seen as being, while we have to lead and make some tough decisions, spreading our diplomatic wings, drawing more people to us, working. When you're the lone superpower, you have a specific set of obligations, and we need to, like you're working the North Korean issue with the international community, good thing. You're working Iran with the international community, good thing. All of these things, we need to have people reflect on the fact that we are a good people, a good country trying to do good in the world. And that gets tarnished in all this, but I think people fundamentally still believe that about us.
Well, because they respond when they see us in occasion of tsunami and responding with American.
It's the way we've always done it.
If we underestimate the potential of a country, next time around we may be too eager to estimate.
Well, it's the problem you had in Iraq.
Exactly.
You remember his son-in-law Hussein Kamel in 1995.
And he came out and
opened up the biological weapons file
right.
again. You remember 1991, the intelligence professionals thought he was years away from a nuclear weapon. He was months away from a nuclear weapon. Does this history...
So did that make us more likely to say, he's not bluffing, he has them?
Yeah, it probably, in the scheme of one of the big factors, is that history had a real impact on us. It really did.
Are we likely to look at all this experience with respect to Iraq and intelligence and weapons of mass destruction and make some of a misjudgment because we're misreading this?
Charlie, this is a human business, and human beings are going to make human judgments. Here's the one thing that we have to be careful about. There's no doubt that we have to do a better job, and lots of professional tradecraft lessons learned that people are implementing today, and they're good things. But the one thing that you don't want to lose is the ability of an analyst to make a tough call and recognize that that tough call is their tough call, and they can make that tough call, because if you're afraid to be wrong, because of the public scrutiny and what falls on your head, you're not going to write good analysis. So yes, it has to be balanced, and yes, we have to weigh everything, but one of the lessons we don't want to have come out of this is men and women of enormous expertise hanging it out on the line, and policymakers understanding, at the end of the day, it's intelligence, it's judgment, it's analysis. It's not necessarily truth, but you better make sure that you encourage people to step up and say, here's my gut. I can't prove it. I've been following this for 30 years. This is what I believe. And in this environment, people may be a bit gun shy.
Okay, but I mean, if I may, going back to the first, that's exactly what I was asking whether you did with the President of the United States. Did you say, and you said, no, we can't do that because it's policy. This is, Mr. President, in my gut, what I believe.
Charlie, I did my job. I understood, this relationship between intelligence and the policymaker. Policymakers don't want you over the line. You don't want to be over the line. You give them your best judgments in what you write. If somebody believes you have a policy equity and you have a policy position, then everything you write will be looked from the perspective of people who think, you see, the director said this, and therefore his analysts are reflecting his view. You can't be there. You can't be there in our business.
Because we were distracted by Iraq, the effort to do what you just said was your primary objective was less likely to succeed.
Charlie,
is that true?
From the perspective of the intelligence community and what we were doing and what my men and women were doing, we never got distracted by Al-Qaeda. By Iraq. We never got distracted by what we were supposed to do against terrorism. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. Our folks never lost their focus on bin Laden and what we needed to do around the world to ensure that he didn't strike this country again.
And your effort against bin Laden was not in any way influenced by what was happening in Iraq.
Charlie, all I can tell you is We changed no behavior. We continued to surge resources. We
And
dealt
added-
with this.
Okay. Let me conclude with this because where I began. You want to tell a story about these men and women. Tell us what it is that you find that you want the country to know about the Central Intelligence Agency and the men and women who serve there. What is it that is essential as we go forward to know about what they're doing and about their commitment and about the consequences of their work?
Well, Charlie, these are men and women that you won't often meet. You meet some of them.
And if they die in the service of the country, it's not known publicly, even though it's known on the wall of the CIA building.
No, and 11 died on my watch. But the important thing for people to know is these are people of enormous capability and passion, great intellectual expertise, great honesty. They've done a lot of great things for this country. You know, Libya was disarmed because of intelligence. A.Q. Khan, a man as dangerous as bin Laden, his network was brought down because of intelligence. We went to the president 4 days after 9/11 and gave him a plan to take down Afghanistan. We operated against al-Qaeda around the world. We sat with Israelis and Palestinians and helped them for a period of time bring more security to their populations. You know, the point is the report card's always mixed. And yes, some big things did not go particularly well, but these men and women are enormously devoted to the country and doing it right. They get up every day and they take risk. They're judged every day by the paper they produce and the risks that they take, and it's all out there for everybody to see. Not many other professions subject themselves to the kind of scrutiny. And you know, the other thing, Charlie, that's interesting is a matter of professional integrity. We don't wait around for commissions and everybody else to tell us what we did wrong. Of course, we're very open about that. We as professionals sit down and evaluate ourselves and are tougher on ourselves than other people are. You know, we didn't find WMD in Iraq, something that was very painful to all of us. We sent both David Kay and Charlie Dulfer over there and said one thing to them, to both of them: tell the truth. Find the truth and tell it. In whatever way you can, we can stand it.
At the Center of the Storm, the subtitle of this book is My Years at the CIA. George Tenet. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Good to see you.
Appreciate it.
Back in a moment. Stay with us.